Hello, it's Andy Parks from the Washington Times, and I'll be joined by Stephen Dinan, Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor, right after this. You know, as a listener to my podcast, you qualify to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. Simply go to washingtontimes.com/Andy. That's washingtontimes.com/ANDY. Joining me now, Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor Stephen Dinan. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Andy.
COVID-19 pandemic eats into Social Security solvency. Now, I must admit that did get my attention. The money starts going away this year? Why?
It's a matter of sort of looking at the balance sheet, and the money starts dropping in the balance sheet. This is very complicated, and your listeners probably may remember back to the 2000 presidential election when Al Gore kept talking about the lockbox for Social Security. So what that all goes back to, the Social Security is not a welfare program. It's funded by taxes coming in. And for the last 25 years or so, I guess 35 years, there had been the trust fund. Income had been coming in, and it was more, the payroll taxes covered more than what was needed to pay benefits. And so the money was going into a trust fund. And of course, what that really meant was the money was being spent by the government in other places, but they were putting an IOU back in the Social Security Trust Fund with interest. So there were some financial games here, but for the last 10 years, the amount of money coming in payroll taxes is not enough to actually cover the amount going out. So we were dipping into the trust fund, but interest on the IOUs was also covering that. So on the books, revenue coming in was enough to cover the outgoing benefits being paid. What's changing this year for the first time ever is that income, combined income from the taxes and interest income, is no longer enough. And the federal government, as of this year, will start eating into those trust funds. And that puts us on a fairly fast glide point to exhausting the trust funds. That's sort of the big point. Right now, it's the trust funds will be gone in 2034, according to this new report from the Social Security trustees. And at that point in 2034, once the trust funds are exhausted, at that point, under the law, the government can no longer pay beyond the taxes coming in. And at this point, it appears that that will only cover about 78 cents of every dollar that is promised to people, to retirees and disabled folks in the year 2034. So we've expected this. This point was always going to come, but now we have clarification that this year will be the year that we begin that downward slide towards insolvency for the Social Security trust funds. And that insolvency means that the Social Security checks in about a little more than a decade from now, those Social Security checks, what we were promised and what a lot of retirees are counting on for that check to make ends meet, will suddenly be cut by more than 20 cents for every dollar.
Wow. All right, I want to turn to Afghanistan. You have an exclusive. Convicted rapist reached the U.S. on an Afghan evacuation flight. Let me get this straight. Americans couldn't get out, but this guy could?
Yeah, that's exactly what it appears to be. This is a guy who was he'd been in the U.S. He came as a refugee at some point in the last century, probably in the 1990s. He actually became a green card holder, so a legal permanent resident in the year 2000. Then a decade later, has a rape conviction out in Idaho, and was deported, and somehow ended up on an evacuation flight, and not one of these flights to the third country, to a third country military base, brought straight here to Dulles in the DC area. And luckily, a Customs and Border Protection officer at the airport flagged him and said, "Hey, well, this guy, this is pretty crazy. This guy has not only was he does he have the rape conviction? He's been deported before. What in the world is he doing on this flight?" And they flagged him, and prevented him from being sent, to the military bases here, or being released outright. And so he's now sitting at an ICE detention facility while he argues his case. It looks like the Customs and Border Protection officer actually trying to get him just to turn around and go back. It's called withdrawal of application for admission, and they were trying to get him to withdraw his application, but he apparently refused that and said, "No, I don't want to leave. I want to stay." And so now he's in detention fighting to be allowed to be re-released into the U.S. The information that I received from law enforcement officials, he left his wife and 11-month-old son back in Afghanistan to make this flight here. So a lot of sort of interesting things about this guy's trajectory. He, for what it's worth, he has a long, not necessarily the rape is by far the most serious charge, but a pretty long rap sheet out in Idaho. With just any number of driving infractions, and seems never to have been insured, and apparently seems to have had his license revoked or suspended because of all of his run-ins with the law, and still was driving on a suspended license at the time that arrested for the rape.
All right, now that takes me to this story. Democrats urge DHS to waive fees for Afghan migrants. That in and of itself is risky. Doesn't it cut into the vetting policy? I mean, it may be helping Afghans, but not protecting Americans.
The Democrats' argument is that sometimes in order to actually advance through the process for being paroled, and real quickly, so most of the folks that are coming in, those Afghans who assisted the U.S. war effort, and there's a special visa for them. It's actually literally called a special immigrant visa that exists for that category of folks. Very few of the people that have been brought to the U.S. right now appear to have come in on special immigrant visas. They appear to have come in on what's known as parole, which is a power that belongs to the Homeland Security Secretary to admit essentially anybody of his choosing for humanitarian or national interest reasons. And so thousands of people have been paroled and are at U.S. bases right now that, they do not have the special immigrant visa. The issue is that part of parole is that you are charged a nearly $600 fee for your parole application. And these Democrats say, well, if you charge them that fee, it slows down the process. They have to prove that they have paid that fee before they can actually advance through the parole process. These folks can't get on with their lives here in the U.S. as long as we have that fee sitting out there, or can't get on with it quickly. So let's waive that fee. The issue with that is that the agency that fee goes to, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, part of Homeland Security, you and I have actually talked about this aspect before. That agency is funded by fees, almost exclusively funded by fees. A third of its applications, a third of the business does, is already fee-free. So, like refugees don't actually pay a fee for their applications. Asylees don't pay fees for their applications. So that means that all of the workload for those cases, which are skyrocketing right now, all that workload falls on the immigrants who are doing it the right way, so to speak, the folks who are coming here to reunite with families and waiting in the line, the folks who want to naturalize, who want to become citizens, have to pay a fee for that naturalization application. If we continue to offer waivers and allow other applications to go without paying, then we're just going to have to charge the people who are doing things the right way more, or else it's going to end up, the bill's going to end up with the taxpayers. Congress is going to have to make an appropriation of money to cover all of this, all of the operations that the agency can no longer do. And this is an agency which is already struggling. We did a report earlier this year where it has a 10 million man-hour efficiency in its operations. It doesn't have the money or the manpower to do what it's trying to do right now. You add in these fee waivers for the Afghans who all need to be processed. If they're here under parole, that workload falls on U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, in addition to the fact that the Biden administration just recently proposed and has apparently already started hiring for a new asylum program where it wants to take up to 300,000 a year asylum cases that would normally go to the Justice Department, and it wants those to be decided by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So all of those would be fee-free applications as well. The agency is really getting slammed by the Biden administration policies, and something's got to give.
All right, one more thing. Border deaths soar. 2021 could break an all-time record. I guess if more people are coming in, the number of deaths rise accordingly?
Yeah, and the folks I talked with said it really, in large part, is a simple matter of math. You said you got more people coming. Well, that means more people dying in the U.S. side of the border at the border. It means more people dying on the trip up here. It just means more carnage and death. There are a couple of other things going on here, too. The people who are dying, they're people who are trying to evade capture. Right now, there are a whole bunch of people who are showing up because they know under the Biden policies, they have a good chance of just being caught and released and admitted, a notice to appear for a court date 4 years in the future. And they're like, woohoo, home free. So the people that are dying are the ones who are trying to sneak by. And so you're seeing, and we're seeing, and those are, we talk about gotaways, people who are evading detection. You're seeing a large surge in those. What you're also seeing is the smugglers who are carrying them, because there's so much money to be made. The smugglers who are carrying them are increasingly reckless and dangerous in what they're doing in terms of driving them or taking them through risky routes. So one of the things that we've seen is there have been, I think, 4 or 5 major automobile crashes with folks who are carrying illegal immigrants, where at least 5, 8 people have died in the same crash. Every year there are always a number of deaths, of single and double, 1 or 2 deaths in crashes. But we've seen the massive accident out in California where an SUV collided with, I think, a semi-truck with 13 people dead. There have been 2 crashes in Texas, which cost 8 lives each. So it's eagerness of smugglers to try and cut and run, and the need for the Border Patrol. Sometimes they're cutting off their chases altogether. Just say the Border Patrol sort of has to decide whether to chase folks and the risks involved, and to the Border Patrol agents, to the migrants themselves, and to civilians, just innocent citizens who get caught up in this. It's a really, really, really bad equation for all involved. And so, the more people flee, more people coming, the more people are willing to flee, the more deaths you got. It's a bad situation.
All right, one more thing. What are you working on?
CBS has reported that there are 57,000 Afghans, 17,000 of them being held in bases on U.S. soil, and another 40,000 being held at bases overseas. The bases here in the U.S., 8 different bases, have a capacity right now to hold about 30,000 people. They've been ordered to up that capacity to 50,000. And, I was talking with a congressman a few minutes ago who said that Fort McCoy in Wisconsin had been planning, they said their capacity was 10,000. They've now been told, nope, you got to find another 3,000 spaces, which raises all sorts of questions about, okay, if they had said 10,000 is the most we can do, where are they going to get the other 3,000? What does that mean for operations at the base and the community surrounding that base? And if that's happening, if all of these bases across 5 different states are being told, hey, you got to find more space, we got more people than we'd originally anticipated, raises a whole lot of questions. Plus, it raises a question of who are these people? If we're going to bring them all to U.S. soil while we process them, can we ever deport them back to Afghanistan if they don't end up qualifying? That's why there's such a push to keep folks in third countries and only bring them to the U.S. after they've gone through the process. But it looks like the U.S. is ramping up its capacity here, and the Biden administration appears to want to bring everybody here fairly quickly.
Look forward to that story. All right, folks, you can read all of Stephen Dinan's stories at WashingtonTimes.com. As always, Stephen, thank you very much. We'll do it again.
My pleasure, Andy.
Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor, Stephen Dinan. Thanks for joining me today, and remember to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. Go to WashingtonTimes.com/Andy. You'll get 24/7 digital access to the Washington Times at 50% off. Again, go to WashingtonTimes.com/ANDY. I'm Andy Parks. Have a great day.